it occurs to me that like so many of our conversations are, and just like how, you know, it's just sort of the nature of human psychology in general, but it's this constant effort to really reconcile sort of the oldest parts of ourselves with the newest, you know, most newly emergent parts of ourselves. I mean, you and I, you know, we have conversations like these every month, and they're always fascinating, both for us and for the people who watch, largely because it's all taking place within this field of meta awareness that we all have access to. And that meta awareness brings with it a certain, you know, curiosity, a certain kind of resilience, or even anti-fragility, kind of a hurts more, bothers you less sensibility.
Exactly. Anti-fragile is a good way of understanding it.
Which I think gives us sort of, you know, everything we need, the tools that we need to begin to do this work and to really start taking a look at some of these adaptive intelligences that we still have in us that were really, you know, calibrated, even fine-tuned for optimal mental health a million years ago, back when we were on the savannah, right? And now we're still carrying these defenses with us, these reactions with us every step of the way, until now we have, you know, again, access to this kind of meta-aware level of consciousness that allows us to start bringing the entirety of our being online just to have these conversations. Because as you're talking, I mean, I'm feeling some of those, you know, really deep, like I keep kind of patting my belly, because that's where it feels like a lot of them kind of come from. They're welling up from somewhere really, really deep down, maybe even a pre-verbal level that's really hard to get to sort of rationally.
It's absolutely a pre-verbal level.
And yet I can feel it emerging. I can feel that energy coming forth as we're talking within this container of meta awareness. But there's all that connective tissue in between. Like we started talking about life stories, and I could see as we're talking, you know, every chapter of my life story that I've sort of inherited for myself at each stage of my development. And there's little aspects of those stages that are still part of my life story. And in fact, my work over the last really 2 years of doing these shows with folks like you and Ken and others has been confronting a lot of those really negative, kind of sour aspects of my own life story that were basically provoking defensive states all the time, and anxieties and all that. And I realized I had to actually fundamentally start changing that script before I could start feeling a little bit more comfortable showing up on camera with people as, you know, brilliant and warm as yourself.
Well, you know, that's you doing trauma work. You know, that when you go, you notice you didn't forget about all the stuff you're talking about, but you feel differently about it. How did you do that? I mean, that's a physiological shift in your consciousness around that stuff. And so that trauma work always involves some kind of accessing the experience physiologically, which opens up the whole memory, the body memory, the cognitive memory, so on, and then reconsolidating it from a higher point of view, a higher level of awareness, a higher level of moral awareness, higher level of interpersonal awareness. And as you reconsolidate it, what happens? The negative charge goes down, it gets less rigid, and it becomes more integrated, more linked to all the different parts of your consciousness. And you see it as a part of a much larger and more important whole, where everybody has a function.
Right.
You know, the selfish me has a function, the violent me has a function, the loving me has a function, the naive me has a function. All of them fit into that community. My self-aware consciousness is the choir director, and my job is to always be directing the choir to sing in harmony. And then here, just like a choir director hears when there's a sour note, and helping, and not just, you know, the choir director does not pull out a pistol and shoot somebody who's singing out of key. Okay, it's like, oh, you're out of key, bam. Right. Okay, now we're going to be back in harmony. Okay, that's not what he does or she does. You go, oh, you're out of harmony. Let me help you get in harmony with the rest of us. Oh yeah, that sounds great. Okay, no, actually, you need to do a solo now. Okay. You know, you're in an alley, Mr. Violent Self, you guys to do a solo with this guy that's, you know, trying to mess with you. You know, go fuck him up. And we'll all just, you know, kind of help you out. Okay, great. Now, now that the trauma healing part of me now has to heal you from the trauma of having to fuck that guy up. Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Now we're back in harmony. The more that we feel a sense of positive responsibility to be a good choir director, the more than that, the autobiographical narrative continues to play. And, out of that is the shift from self-authoring mind to self-transforming mind, to use Kegan's terms. You don't really know what's going to arise out of that because complex systems aren't predictable, but some good will. You keep on keeping everybody in harmony and some cool thing will come out of it.
Well, that's kind of the thing about why defensive states can be so comfortable, right? I mean, once you get to these sort of levels of altitude and of development, I mean, shit starts getting kind of, it's hard to know when there's solid ground underneath your feet. It's a lot easier to kind of know your place because someone tells you where your place is, right? Rather than having to ad hoc figure all of this out sort of for yourself. And that creates its own anxieties and insecurities and defenses. And I think that's kind of the important thing here is that, these defensive states, they're natural. I mean, we get defensive for a reason.
We have to have them.
Yeah.
If you don't have them, you're a psychopath. We have to have the capacity for shame. That's why my book, The Gift of Shame, that was not an ironic title.
Right.
It's a gift. It's what keeps us from being psychopaths.
Right.
We're being flaming narcissists.
Mm-hmm.
We're ashamed if we act in a way that's not pro-social. We should be ashamed. Now, we don't want to get lost in it. We want to make adjustments so then we can feel virtuous again. That's what we do if we're orchestrating the choir appropriately.
Right. Yeah, totally fascinating. And it also seems to me, Keith, as you're talking, that when you're talking about these sort of organizing principles that allow us to sort of add a new chapter onto our personal autobiographical narrative, and make it that much more coherent. It seems like oftentimes there's a competition of different possible sort of, points of organization where
there's conflict.
Like for me, and just go back to my process in doing the show, what helped me was getting to the point where I realized what I need to hold myself accountable to was not sort of my own fears and anxieties of being found out or all the imposter stuff that came along with it. But it's like, okay, I'm fortunate enough to be sitting in a seat that for whatever reason creates a lot of value and a lot of meaning for people out there. I need to live up to that.
That's right.
So this became something that was like outside of myself, a little bit bigger. The seat I'm sitting in felt a little large for me, right? So I'm like, okay, I need to grow into this. This needs to become sort of my new organizing principle. And once that sort of clicked, a lot of other things began to click into place where it's like, I used to have this anxiety that like, okay, I don't want to be held up as, some integral role model because Jesus, I feel just as broken as anyone else. And I have just as much work to do. And, and I'm struggling as much as anyone else. I don't want anyone to put me on a pedestal just because I'm showing up on camera. And as soon as I sort of made that shifted as well. And it started, well, okay, this is actually about the process and the fact that I'm comfortable talking about whatever brokenness that I feel. Well, that can be valuable to people too. All right. Like we can sort of, I can grow into this, and that growing into this can be part of this seat that I'm trying to sit in itself.
Well, no offense, but you are an integral role model. You're much more authoritative and confident and articulate now than when I first met you, and you were pretty articulate when I first met you. So these things have grown your unconscious to the point that you have a different level of discourse in these kinds of dialogues than when you and I first talked, at least as far as I can see about you, which is how we can tell vertical development. We have different reactions. We have different capacities in different situations and a different understanding. The understanding is that there's all these processes that we're always going to be managing, and that different things are going to arise periodically, problems, destructive shadow, trauma that we need to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
When I was in Brazil, I was homesick the first 3 or 4 days, and I was kind of resisting being there when I was teaching, and interestingly, I broke my finger in doing a therapy thing the 4th day I was there.
That's some intense therapy.
It was intense.
High contact therapy.
I was working with this woman in front of 45 different people, and she was dealing with some asshole guy. You know, it's a patriarchy, you know, in Brazil. There's a lot of guys being shitty to women historically. Anyway, you know, like I pull up a pillow. She wanted to kick him. And I said, go ahead and kick him, you know, but not knowing that she studied Muay Thai for 4 years. So she didn't kick the pillow. She kicked my hand and broke my finger.
Oh, man.
I had to go down out of the mountains of Brazil to a hospital and get a cast put on that night. Anyway, I was feeling kind of homesick. And so they do constellations there. So, you know, I was with some of the people on the team and I said, well, let's do a constellation. So we did constellation. It's an interesting form of treatment. We'll talk about it sometime, maybe do an episode on it. Mm. And in that, there was a person who was representing Keith's homesickness. And I went, okay, well, let's work on it. I mean, I kind of tolerated it most of my life. Let's go deeper into that. Where is that? Where does that keeps happening up? And it led into a trauma history, which led into some work, which led into a feeling of liberation from that particular thing. I was thinking, God, after all these years, all this therapy, all this self-awareness, here's a major thing that I've kind of ignored until this moment. I had to kind of force myself to go teach in a place where I was kind of scared of doing it, and then take this on in a way that I hadn't taken it on before, with the help of some other people doing this constellation. I thought, wow. And it made me think, there's a lot of this in the future. I mean, I expect to have stuff like that happen until I die. And again, that used to bother me, that stuff would keep coming up. Now I'm kind of excited about it. I mean, I like the idea of the whole integral idea of a lifetime of development, of growth, and you're never there. You're always just having more capacities.
That's right. It's not a destination. It's not a noun. It's a verb.
And you know, there's an irony and a paradox in that on every developmental line, the more you ascend, the more you have vertical development, one of the things that characterizes vertical development on any line, if you think about it, is you have more options. Mm-hmm. You have more choices. You're not rigid. You know, like Sheldrake said that evolution is the combination of creativity and habits. Okay, so you're less driven by habits, you have more access to creativity. So you have more options the more you go on any line, but paradoxically, you have fewer choices. Because the higher you are on a line, the more you have to make the right choice because it's more visible to you. And so having more options and fewer choices is a paradox. And yet there it is.
Right.
You go to the second tier, you have an infinity of options, really, but you have way fewer choices because it's much clearer to you what serves the highest good, what's more beautiful, good, and true. And that's true in a relationship. You have many more choices, many more options, but you have fewer choices because I'm going to make the choice that serves love for us. I'm not going to make the choice that serves violence. And this whole thing about the integration of defenses line and understanding that defenses are there for me to avoid myself, for me to avoid finding those places and liberating them into the choir. Mm. Understanding that then directs me into that process. This is one of the reasons why Gestalt was so popular in the 70s. Fritz Perls said Gestalt only does two things. It makes the implicit explicit and it points out the obvious. Okay. Now, he couldn't distinguish between attachment problems and relationship problems and traumatic programming and shadow and how they all fit together and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't the way that he was wired. But as a practical technology of change, it was very effective at the time because basically it was addressing this thing, okay? There's a defense, go inward and find it and do something with it. Integrate.
Yeah.